So this is the second part of my planned 3-part series on the Meidner Plan. I'd strongly suggest watching the first to understand the context of what I'll be talking about here, but I'll do a quick recap anyway. In the 1970s, Sweden faced some issues with its otherwise successful social democratic system, which they built in the aftermath of World War II. They built an economic model which had achieved high growth, low inflation, low unemployment, and low income inequality. Unfortunately, keeping inflation under wraps had become a bit of an issue, and growth wasn't as strong as they'd wanted it. Additionally, income inequality between high and low income workers did shrink, but wealth inequality skyrocketed, as the wage solidarity agreements meant to tamp down inflation and promote income equality, ended up creating massive surpluses for highly profitable companies. When I first planned out this series, I expected to have one video on the context of the plan, one on the plan itself, and one on what followed the proposal. But in writing the script, I realized that there was much more to talk about in regards to theory, backing the thinking of the Meidner Plan. So instead, the first video of the series represents the context, this video represents the theory backing the thinking of the plan, and the third video will represent the practice, the Meidner Plan itself, and what actually became of it. In 1971, the Swedish Trade Union Confederation's Labor Congress commissioned a study for the purpose of finding a way to meet the social democratic goals that the previous reforms had embodied, while also addressing the emergent tension between achieving high growth rates and income equality, and secondarily, to address the problems of increasing wealth inequality. The team tasked with the study was led by Rudolf Meidner, Anna Hedborg, and Gunnar Fond. With their given objectives, they clarified 3 aims for their study. 1. Complement the wage policy based on the principle of solidarity. 2. Counteract the concentration of wealth which stems from industrial self-financing. 3. To increase the influence which employees have over the economic process. For the sake of clarity, I will elaborate further on each of these 3 aims. The first aim emphasizes the fact that whatever solution was to be proposed, it needed to complement the wage solidarity policy. This means that efforts needed to be made to build on top of the successes of the policy, which did manage to lower inequality between high wage earners and low wage earners. But it is more than possible that one could end up endorsing a system of worker ownership that actually locks in inequality between workers rather than minimize it. 2/3 of income inequality comes not from the differences between workers and management, but between, for example, those who work for Google and those who work for the firms that Google contracts out janitorial work. The second aim looks at curbing the wealth inequality that stems from industrial self-financing. There were firms with excessive profits enabled by various elements of the social democratic system. These profits would be reinvested into said businesses, ensuring their increased profitability, though naturally those gains would primarily benefit the owners of said businesses rather than the workers, especially since wage solidarity policies prevented the relevant unions from going out ahead of lower income workers, as that would, of course, create income inequality and ultimately undermine the solidarity that empowered workers to stand together enough to demand anything from their employers at all. In pursuing low inflation, income equality, and full employment, you ended up creating an environment in which high growth led to rapid accumulation of capital. It seems from here obvious enough that the ultimate way to close the circle would be the transference of said capital into the hands of the workers. As for the third aim, increasing the influence of workers over the economy is not directly tied to the objectives outlined by the Swedish Trade Union Confederations, but from a tertiary problem created by the 2 previous problems. Increased wealth concentration led to situations where a few shareholders, after cobbling together the right to vote by proxy for other shareholders, were capable of manipulating the direction of companies completely, leading to a powerful oligarchy having the control they needed to benefit themselves at the expense of the interests of the workers. Any solution would have to work to democratize the workplace to protect the gains that the workers had long fought for. These 3 aims were to be respected on top of respecting the goals of the Meidner model. As mentioned in the analysis of the second aim, it was obvious enough that the solution there would involve some form of worker ownership, addressing the system of private capital which had escaped with barely a scratch in the post-war reforms. Yet, as I covered in the analysis of the first aim, there is nothing inherent about worker ownership itself as a concept that prevented from violating the other aims and goals. What was needed was a plan that could successfully balance all of these complexities. Hence, the employee investment funds and the organizational infrastructure that was to be built around them, which I will go into detail on in the next video. To finish the video and better understand what the Meidner Plan would become, we ought to look at what it didn't become by looking at the solutions that were considered but ultimately decided against in the study. Firstly was the concept of branch funds. This was a proposal that had emerged a few times in Sweden before the commissioning of the study, and even concurrently with it. In summary, it was a plan centered around addressing the first aim delineated in this study, respecting the income equality promotion efforts of the wage solidarity policy. The idea here was that companies with high profitability would be instructed to pay into a fund that would be used to supplement the wages of workers in low profitability companies. There is more to it, but the core problem here is that this would be effectively a subsidy for inefficient businesses and practices, which would naturally promote inefficiency. The second suggested solution to deal with this increase in wealth inequality was to do something that should sound very familiar. This would be to simply increase the corporate tax rate. Now, this is definitely something that should be addressed in far more detail in another video and covering a context far broader than just 1970s Sweden, to the point I'm hesitant to go into depth as to why this was not the solution that the Meidner Plan came up with. So I'll directly quote Rudolf Meidner from his 1978 book, Employee Investment Funds, An Approach to Collective Capital Formation, and then work to explain that position. Quote, "The solution which we recommended does not therefore involve a severe and all-embracing increase in the corporation tax. What it does mean is that a tax policy which has encouraged investment and the consolidation of assets will in future not have the adverse distributive effects which it had undoubtedly had in the past. If we are to retain the ground rules of the present system of company taxation, this does, however, presuppose that the system has to be built into an arrangement which enables employees to share in the growth of assets, which is at once a prerequisite for and a consequence of the self-financing processes which is at work within business enterprises." End quote. Meidner here is making the point that 1. We don't want to hurt economic growth. 2. A higher corporate tax rate would hurt economic growth. 3. We can ensure workers benefit from asset growth without hurting economic growth. It is here where you might see my hesitancy in regards to this subject. However, as I'm already here, I might as well go a bit deeper into this on a side note. All three of these propositions have come under attack, particularly in recent times. This is despite the fact, in regards to the first proposition, left-wing thinkers right across the spectrum from liberal reformists like John Maynard Keynes to revolutionary socialists like Karl Marx agree that the development of productive forces is, in fact, a good thing. Of course, this is all a topic better served for a discussion in a completely different video, but is relevant enough here as a defense of one of these three propositions. The second proposition, that a higher corporate tax would hurt economic growth, is in this particular context true enough. In the quoted book, Meidner makes the point that there simply exist different types of profits. Quotes, excess profits in the wage policy context, that of untapped potential or scope for pay increases, and excess profits as more a temporary or cyclical phenomenon. End quote. There are times when a corporation's profits are reinvested in equipment and expansion, and then there are times where it is simply pocketed by shareholders. It is a complicated thing to have a corporate tax that can successfully differentiate the reinvestment from the pocketing, and even making it progressive, higher taxes and higher profits, wouldn't properly account for that. This is by no means saying that a corporate tax is always bad, particularly if it's compensating for spending on something that is more beneficial than just simple corporate reinvestment. But it isn't an effective tool for wealth redistribution. The third proposition, that we can have workers benefit from increased economic growth without harming it, is an argument which is viewed with a measure of suspicion on the left because it seems to be, word for word, the mantra of the centrist third-way turn of social democratic or left parties across the Western world. The key difference here is that the Meidner Plan did not intend to do this simply by clearing away the debris left by capitalism, as at some point the effort that needs to go into clearing up the debris ends up getting in the way of the profit maximization of private property, and when that happens, it's the debris clearing that gives way, not the private property. Instead, the plan here would be to go directly after corporate ownership, to get workers inside of the machine rather than out of its way. Now, with both the context and the theory behind the Meidner Plan explained, I promise that the next video in the series will actually directly cover the Meidner Plan and its specifics. It was just too important to cover why the Meidner Plan was designed as it was, beyond simply the time and place it was developed within, and I could not do that justice while covering plan specifics in a single video in under 10 minutes. Please like and share this video. Also subscribe and click the notification button in order to be alerted when my next video comes out.